it's Jo from Minerva. Today I'm going to make the Charlie Caftan by Closet Core Patterns, and I'm going to use gauze, which is a different fabric for some people, and I want to show you how the two layers are joined together and some techniques for making a garment. The Charlie Caftan has two images on the front cover, a long version with a slit up the side, the sort of classic caftan style. It's got a very deep sleeve, a deep opening. Or you can have a shorter mini version which has a smaller sleeve opening, a pleat and pockets, or you can try one with a gathered front, and that's what I'm going to show you today. And there's a reason I'm showing you the gathered one. It's because that part of the pattern is useful for both of these. It's really tricky part. The rest of it is just a beginner make dress. It's got dolman sleeves, hems and a facing, and that piece at the beginning there, that's the bit that you might need to see in real time. I'm making a little mini caftan in a gauze, and I've had my eye on this gauze for a while because it's got a little silver sheen running through it. And although it appears that it might be sheer because it's quite lightweight and slim, it is a summer weight fabric, but it's not see-through, because on the back of gauze is another layer of fabric. So this one that you can see with the silver on is one layer, and then there's another layer on the back, but you can't see it because there's lots and lots and lots of tiny threads holding the two pieces together. So this is called double gauze, and it's so well put together I can't get it apart to show you. There we go. So you can see, look, it's two layers of fabric. It's the white on the back, that's this one, and then this one at the front, and it's held together with tiny stitches. So when you're working with it, your finishing technique is absolutely key. You can either use an overlocker if you've got one, that'll solve all of your problems, or you can French seam your dress together, because the two main seams are really the two underarm seams, and you can French seam the piece here so that it's not too much, but you can't just leave this untreated. It's already fraying a little bit there. It's quite a loose weave. The other thing you must do with gauze is you must pre-wash it. So this is how the gauze came out of the packet from Minerva. It's flat, it's shiny, and after I'd washed it, you get a sort of little bumpy, linen-y look. There you go, look, you can see it there. And that's the character of this fabric. If you're the sort of person who doesn't like a sort of crushed linen look or a sort of crumpled summer look, then this fabric really isn't for you, and you want to make the Charlie Caftan in another fabric, that's absolutely fine. But I want to show you the sort of effect that you can get with gauze, which is a really light summer casual look. So we're imagining we're going to get a nice gather on the front. The reason I've chosen gauze as well is I can get a good gather on that front panel, and that's the main feature of the dress. But I didn't choose view A, which has the pleats and the fold pockets, because this fabric isn't stripy vertically, it's stripy on a diagonal. So do be aware of that if you're picking a pattern, because if I chose this, then where I make this pleat, the striping diagonals would jar a little bit. I'd get some going here, and then the ones running up to the pocket would be offset from them. So think about if the pattern you have chosen to work with this fabric will take a diagonal print or not. But it is beautiful. I've been looking at it for ages. It's by Rico. All the products that I use are listed below, so if working with gauze isn't going to be your thing, you can swap that out. In the rest of the kit is the thread, some interfacing for the neck, and the pattern, of course. A few tips for cutting out. Once you've pre-washed your fabric, you'll get a sort of scrunch and crinkle in it. So before you cut it, you need to keep that finish, because that's going to be what it's like at the end. If you iron it now and then put on your pieces, you'll cut them out on a very nice flat piece of fabric, and then when you sew it together it will all be very flat and very well pressed, but then when you wash it, it will crinkle back up again, and you might lose some of the finesse that you put into your sewing because it will re-crinkle. Also, if you use a gauze that has got a crinkle in, like this one, so this one's a double gauze that's got embroidery on it, and this one is very crinkly, so you must have it crinkly when you cut it out, because that's going to be the finished look. If you cut this piece out, let's turn it around so you can see, if you ironed this piece, it would be that big, and you would cut out your piece and it would be that big, and then when you wash it and it all crinkles back up, you might have a sizing issue. So make sure that when you've pre-washed it, it's all crinkly and you cut it out crinkly, because that will be your finish. A good way to decide which view you're going to make is to click on the pattern and see what other people have made. So I didn't know whether to choose the wider sleeve or the smaller sleeve, and when I looked at other makers and some of the posts that they'd made, I decided to make the smaller sleeve after I'd seen how long it was. I'm quite short in the body, so I couldn't really afford for the whole of my body to be a sleeve. And I also spotted a dress that I really liked, which had the short dress but the long dress waist tie, so I'm going to make the waist tie as well. I'm going to work my way through the instructions as you would. If there's anything that I swap around, I will let you know, but I will spend the most time showing you how to make that front feature with the waist, under bust waistband and the gathers, because the rest is quite simple, and if you've chosen this pattern, it's because you can hem and you can cut out. So let's start with the first part, which is to finish your raw edges. I'm going to use a technique I like to use when I want to turn a really thin tie. So from my overlocker, I've made a thread chain as long as the tie, and then when I sew the tie, I'm going to run that thread chain on the right side of the fabric so that I can pull it through. So you need your thread chain to be long enough to come out of the end of your tie. You keep the thread chain attached. It's going to run along the centre of your tie in the fold. You've just got to make sure that you don't sew it. And then you need to make sure that your overlocker isn't just overcast in the edge, it's sewing as well, and you sew the two sides of the tie together. Going to add the waist ties onto the front band. I've just added a little bit of fray stop to the one end, so it's just a little bit tacky, and then if I tie a knot in it, because the fray stop is still a little bit tacky, it will just hold the end and that won't fray through. done the same on this one. I'm just going to make a little notch. You could add a bead there if you wanted to, but the end is just a little bit tacky, so I'll just squeeze that together, and that will dry, and you'll have two knobbed ends that won't fray. Okay, for view B, we're going to work on this opening on the front, and this piece is unlike any other front piece that I've cut for a dress, and that's because this edge is the one that's going to be gathered, and this comes together to make the V-neck, and then this is where all the action is going to be. Now, because I'm manipulating my fabric a lot in front of the camera and changing angles and taking it on the mannequin and off the mannequin, I've overlocked all my raw edges, and that's just so that it doesn't fray while I'm working with it. And the first thing we're going to do is make sure that all the markings are on it. So you can see on the back I've used a chalk marker to mark here, and I've measured the 5/8 seam allowance, and the key to getting this front bit really good is to sew very accurately and with the right seam allowances. So there's a 5/8 seam allowance all the way around, and there's 2 dots, and it's asking me to stay stitch up to those dots. So from the right side I've got a line of stay stitching. Now the stay stitching is only a 1mm stitch on the machine, so it's really close, because it says if your fabric frays easily or is loosely woven, you may need to reinforce the corners, and you will definitely need to do that. I've done a line of stay stitching so that I can snip into these corners without it fraying. So that's the first thing to do. The second thing to do is to snip. Now, I've just told you that my fabric's going to fray a lot and is a bit prone to fraying, so I'm going to swap the steps around in the pattern, and I don't normally do that in a sew long, but it's asking me to make these snips and then do all of the 2 rows of gathering here. So just while that fabric's all in one piece, I'm going to skip ahead to the next instruction and do the 2 lines of gathering stitches with the tacking stitch on the machine at stitch length 5, and then I'm going to go back onto the instruction order and clip. I'm going to keep scooting on. I'm going to leave that clip until I actually need it to be clipped open, because I don't want it to fray. So I've done 2 lines of gathering stitches within the seam allowance here, and now I'm going to sew up the centre front seam. I've got my diagonals going very well there as well, because that's on the front, and I'm going to use a 5/8 seam allowance. That's 16 mil, 15 mil. So I've pressed that front seam open, and you can see I've got the diagonal glitter pattern still working, because that's right at the front of my dress. I still haven't clipped the corners yet. I'm reluctant to until I've finished manipulating this sort of larger piece of fabric, because I would be putting a bit of strain on there. So I need the interfaced bodice panel. I need it with the right side up. It doesn't matter so much if you're using a solid fabric, but I want my diagonals to keep running on the front of my dress, so I've just marked the top with a little snip, and then I'm going to put the straps in the center so they just hang over the edge, and I'm going to baste those in place while we complete the rest of the bodice panel. So you have one here and one here. Okay, the next part of the pattern is the trickiest bit, so I feel like now is my time to snip into those corners. I'm ready to manipulate this. So you try and take it to the corner of that stitching, obviously without cutting your stitch line, so you'll get this shape here. And then we're going to gently draw up the gathering stitches. Now this is the trickiest part of the pattern, this whole putting the body panel on, so I'll do it in really quite small steps. Gently gather up the stitches and then line up the interfaced bodice panel piece to the bottom of the rectangular opening, so that's here, and line up the dots. So I've got dot markings on here and I've got the dot markings here, so I'm going to line those up. I'm going to keep my ties out of the way, make sure that they're lining nice and square. So I'm going to match one dot one end and one dot the other end. And now I'm going to distribute the gathering stitches between that body panel. You can see I've pulled my gathering stitches a bit too tight because this is sagging and this is a bit tight. So this is where you take your time, because this is the feature on the front of your dress. So you can't have something badly gathered along the front. It'll look not your best work. So there you go. So you just keep distributing the gathers to fit. And then I'm going to pin that in place along this lower edge. Now, once you've got it pinned into place, precision is everything here, because you've got to get your lining piece to fit as well, and you've got to get all of this opening together. So you need your 5/8 seam allowance. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you've got to sew precisely between the dots. I'm also adding my seam line as well. I'm using a seam gauge to make sure that I get 5/8 along here. I'm going to continue in tiny stages. So the next thing to do is to take the body panel through the rectangle to the wrong side. But I'm going to leave the waist ties on the right side if you're doing waist ties. So you've got the panel now and you're looking at the wrong side of the fabric, and your waist ties are poking through to the right side. Okay, this is where the accuracy comes in. So now you need to match the other dot with the dot on the other side of your little envelope. So you fold the little triangle you snipped back, and you keep the tie on the right side, and you put your dot on your dot. And so you should have, let me put a pin in it so my hand is out of the way. You should have a little triangle touching the side of your body panel. So this is where your first dot was, and you sewed to there, and this is where your second one is, and you're going to sew those two pieces together. The picture shows you it's probably the hardest part of the whole thing, because if you didn't quite sew accurately to the dot, you'll get like a little pinch or a little fold or pucker there. So you might want to just do that with a larger stitch first, just to check it's in the right place, because if it isn't, it's hard to unpick from gauze because it's quite a delicate fabric. If you've used a 2mm seam stitch and you want to unpick it, you'll maybe pull some of the woven thread. So just do a tack along there with your machine just to see if it's in the right place, and if not, you can pull it out. Yep, I flipped that out. I'm happy with that. I've got the gathers coming here from the bottom. I haven't got a pinch there or anything. I've got the tie coming away from the centre of the body panel, and I've got this last bit to attach next. And you can see I've got my diagonal pattern running from my bodice through the body panel and then down into the gather, and that continues along here. It's not pattern matched, it's pattern balanced. That's what I like to achieve. And then we're going to sew the other side and see if we can get the same crispness on the body panel. Okay, it's now time to close up the envelope. So this is the bottom of the bodice panel. Now you've got the top of the bodice panel, and you're going to use those circle dots again. Make sure you don't catch anything else while you're sewing, and that you extend past that stay stitching that you did in the beginning. So you don't want to see that on the right side of your fabric. So that means keeping the 5/8 seam allowance all the way along. So you're going to match the dots again. Try not to get a pucker in the corner. Keep your centre seam nice and flat, so that's not bulky under your bust line. So this is the last part of putting on the bodice panel. I haven't pressed that, but your front will look like that. You'll have your straps if you made them. If you didn't, it will just be that envelope panel. And from the reverse, once that's pressed, you'll see the way you sewed from dot to dot to dot to dot. Okay, there's two options for facing your wrong side. So I've just clipped those points down a little bit because I've got the waist ties. I've got a little bit of bulk each end. And then there's two methods shown in the pattern. There is a machine method, but I'm just going to hand sew it on, and that's the other method on the pattern. So you'll need to press in the seam allowance and then hand stitch the facing on top. So on the inside you've enclosed all of the seams. When you've made it, you've managed to get to the end of the most complicated part of the pattern, where the body panel is attached with the gathers and the ties. The next part is to attach the two pieces together. It does ask you to do the shoulders now and the facing, but I'm going to go to the pockets first because I don't want to be attaching pockets to a whole dress. I'm going to attach the pockets while the front and back are separate. So as you add inseam pockets, you're going to be matching the notches of the pockets with the notches on the side seam of the front and back panels. You need to make sure that you do match the notches, otherwise when you put the two sides together the pockets won't match. Attach the pockets, right sides together, matching the notches, pin and sew. Again, you need to make sure you're using the right seam allowance because you'll be expecting your two pockets to match. So you start at the notch and you leave the other piece above it free. You will need to understitch the pocket. This will stop the pocket sort of peeking out later. So you take the seam allowance towards the pocket and sew it from the right side really close to the seam, so you should get that tiny little stitch line there, and you can press that now, and so when you've got your dress, your pocket will go behind, it won't start peeling out. Okay, back on track with the pattern. I've attached all the pockets and now we're going to attach the shoulder seams. So that's going to be right sides together. This is the back. You'll see there's quite a lot of ease in this pattern. You can follow your measurements on the back, but remember there's quite a lot of ease. That's why I've gone for the tie, because I'm not sure how much ease there's going to be. So I want to make sure that if it's a bit big, I can tie it in at the waist. So we're going to sew the shoulder seams. If you're using French seams, now's the time to start French seaming. Or if you've overlocked your edges, then you can just match up your raw edges and sew with a 5/8 seam allowance. You need to make a facing unit. So that is joining the back facing to the V-neck facing at the shoulder seams. And then you're going to match them up and pin them in place. Sew all the way round. You need to make sure that you've got all the key points as accurate as you can, particularly on that front V. You don't want your centre seam all folded down because it'll give you a slight bulk on the V-neck, so make sure that is definitely pinned down. And if you've got the right seam allowances, then that will fit exactly. Once you've attached the facing, you're going to clip the curve on the back neck and clip the V at the front and turn the facing to the inside. Now, depending on how you finished your neck facing, I finished mine with overlock, so I'm going to stitch 1 inch from the edge of the sewing line out towards the edge of the facing. If you've done a turn, make sure that where you sew, your top stitching catches the facing, so that from this side you'll get your wide line of top stitching, but from the wrong side you've caught your facing folding under. I'm just keeping my facing flat. So you'll be stitching, you'll have a 1 inch gap on your V here, and then a line of top stitching. Be careful with that. Again, it's part of the finish of your dress. You want that to look crisp and neat compared to all the time that you spent making the front panel tie belt. Press this before you top stitch, just so that you make sure that you're rolling the front over and you don't have the facing curling to the front. The facing really finishes the neckline off nicely. Some accurate top stitching just holds everything down into that really neat V shape. You can give it a press and none of the facing is rolling out, so it looks really cool. The last construction stage is probably best illustrated with the picture from the book. So you're going to sew from the underarm seam, down the side seam, round both pockets, attaching them together, and then down to the hem, and the same on the other side. The final part of your Charlie Caftan is to hem everything. So you need to hem the sleeves and the hemline. So you could try that on. It does come up quite short. I've added a little bit to the length of mine. It's described as a mini, and it really is a mini. So make sure that you try it on and get the length that you need. And then that's it finished. So you can see it's an easy shape to sew. It really is. Look at the back, quite a straight shape. But once you get to that piece of detail there, that's what gives it the shape. Okay, so if I put it on, you would really think, what is she wearing? Because it really is that same square shape. But with my ties, and I really recommend that you make the ties, I can shape the dress, and straight away I've got a very different vibe. I've got a really nice neckline. It's quite a deep neckline. You might want to test that out on a 12 first. You've got this sleeve. It does stick out a little bit. It is for that caftan style. Huge pockets. And the tie at the back. This is the Charlie Caftan. So that's the Charlie Caftan by Closet Core Patterns. I've made the mini version with a gathered waist, but you can make one with the pockets and pleats at the front if you've got the right fabric, and you can try one with a viscose or a challis or something with a bit more drape. That would give you that long maxi style. It goes from bust size 31 to 46. I could probably size down a little bit. I've just got a little bit of gaping here. I cut a 14, so maybe I could go down to a 12. It is an American pattern. If you have any questions about making the caftan, please leave those below, and all the products that I've used are listed here too. If you click on the Charlie Caftan pattern, you can look at all the different fabrics that other makers have chosen. Thank you very much for watching. See you again soon.